Good evening, everyone. My name is Marvi de Guzman, your reporter for today. Our topic is about Chapter 2, clarifying what you're trying to accomplish and why. Sa kabanatang ito ay pag-usapan kung paano bumuo ng mutual agreement sa pagitan ng nagpapagawa ng mga project at ng project team tungkol sa mga layunin at inaasahan sa proyekto. Scope in project management. Because a project is defined as a temporary endeavor creating a unique product, service, or result, the project scope is foundational. It defines what work is part of the project and what is not. It establishes what the purpose of the project is, what it will accomplish, and how it will accomplish it. Effectively, it defines the project. So, why scope is important? Effective project scope management gives a clear idea about the time, labor, and cost involved in the project. It helps to distinguish between what is needed for accomplishing the project. Scope in project management also establishes the control factors of the project to address elements that might change during the project life cycle. Scope statement is a written confirmation of the result your project will produce and the terms and conditions under which you'll perform your work. So this is a document that provides the objectives, schedules, tasks, and deliverables of a project. Scope statements align stakeholders' expectations and give projects a framework for success. Once a project is underway, it is important to keep it on track and within scope. In writing a scope statement, it is important to be specific. The more, the better. So example, your project is to build a fence. Alam mo yung mga basic information, but it is not enough. It would be better to define start and end points, fence height, post depth, fence type, weather assumptions, etc., which could serve to reduce the risk of adverse changes in scope later on. Scope statements should include the following information. First, overall description of the work. So this is where you state that the project is to build a fence. Second, deliverables. What will be produced by the project and what are its key features? Also, what client need is the project satisfying? Third, justification for the project. In order to provide a complete understanding of the scope, sometimes it is necessary to dive into the justification of why the project was initiated in the first place. Fourth, constraints. If the project faces certain physical boundaries, this can be a source of risk and thus should be defined further. Fifth, assumptions. All projects have assumed certain conditions as part of their existence. For example, the fence building project has assumed good weather, availability of tools, etc. What are those assumptions and what impact does their inaccuracy have on the project? 6. Inclusions or exclusions. Many projects have items that are uncertain because projects of that type or size sometimes do and sometimes don't include those things. They need to be explicitly included or excluded from the project. Looking at the big picture, how your project fits in. Understanding the situation and thought processes that led to your project's creation helps ensure that you and your project successfully meet people's expectations. So this section helps you clarify the first two elements of your scope statements, which are your project's justifications and objectives. Figuring out why you're doing a project. So when you take it on a project, why you're doing it may seem obvious because your boss told you so. But the real question though isn't why you choose to accept the assignment, but why the project must be done in the first place. So first, identifying the initiator. Your first task in discovering your project's underlying justification is to determine who had the original idea that led to your project. This person is called the project's initiator. So, project success requires that At a minimum, you meet this person's needs and expectations. Be sure to distinguish between drivers and supporters as you seek to find your project's initiator. So, drivers have some say when defining the results of the project. They tell you what you should do. So, for example, the Vice President of Finance who requests a project to upgrade the organization's financial information system is a project driver. Supporters help you perform your project. They tell you what you can do. So the manager of the computer center who must provide staff and resources to upgrade the organization's information system is a project supporter because they tell you what you can do. Next, recognizing other people who may benefit from your project. So although they may not have initiated the idea, other people may benefit from your completed project. They may be people who work with, support, or are clients of your project's drivers, or they may have performed similar projects in the past. They may have expressed interest or needs in areas addressed by your project in meetings, correspondence, or informal conversations. Next, distinguishing the project champion. A project champion is a person in a high position in the organization who strongly supports your project, advocates for your project in disputes, planning meetings, and review sessions, and takes necessary actions to help ensure that your project is successful. Next, considering people who will implement the result of your project. Most projects create a product or service to achieve a desired result. Often, however, the person who asks you to create the product or service isn't the one who will actually use it. Determining your project's drivers' real expectations and needs. So, the needs that your project addresses may not always be obvious. For example, that your organization decides to sponsor a blood drive. Is the real reason for your project to address the shortage of blood in the local hospital or to improve your organization's image in the local community? Next, confirming that your project can address people's needs. So, although needs may be thoroughly documented, you may have difficulty determining whether your project can successfully address those needs. On occasions, companies fund formal feasibility studies to determine whether a project can successfully address a particular need. Next, uncovering other activities that relate to your project. Your project doesn't exist in a vacuum. It may require results from other projects. It may generate products that other projects will use, and it may address needs that other projects also address. So, for these reasons, you need to identify projects related to yours as soon as possible so you can coordinate the use of shared personnel and resources and minimize unintended overlap in project activities and results. Next, emphasizing your project's importance to your organization. How much importance your organization places on your project directly influences the chances for your project's success. When conflicting demands for scarce resources arise, resources usually go to those projects that can produce the greatest benefits for the organization. Then, being exhaustive in your search for information. In your quest to find out what your project is supposed to accomplish and how it fits into your organization's overall plans, you have to seek information that sensitive, sometimes contradictory, and often unwritten. Getting this information isn't always easy. Drawing the line where your project starts and stops. Sometimes your project stands alone, but more often it's one part of related efforts to achieve a common result. You want to avoid duplicating the work of these other related projects, and where appropriate, you want to coordinate your efforts with theirs. So, to make sure your project scope of work description is clear, first, check for hidden inferences. Then, use words that clearly describe intended activities. After that, confirm your understanding of your project scope with your project's drivers and supporters. Stating your project's objectives. As I mentioned earlier in this chapter, objectives are outcomes your project will produce. Your project's outcomes may be products or services you develop or the results of using these products and services. The more clearly you define your project's objectives, the more likely you are to achieve them. So, here we have to make your objectives clear and specific. Then probing for all types of objectives, and then anticipate resistance to clearly define objectives. After that, marking boundaries, project constraints. Defining the constraints you must work within introduces reality into your plans and helps clarify expectations. As you plan and implement your project, think in terms of the following two types of constraints. Limitations. This is the restrictions other people place on the results you have to achieve, the time frames you have to meet, the resources you can use, and the way you can approach your task. Then, the needs. This is the requirements you stipulate must be met so you can achieve project success. Working within limitation. First, understanding the types of limitations. Second, looking for project limitations. Third, addressing limitations in your scope statement. Dealing with needs. As soon as possible, decide on the situations or conditions necessary for your project success. Most of these needs relate to project resources. Here are the few examples of resource-related needs. First, personnel. For example, I need a technical editor for a total of 40 hours in August. Then, next, the budget. I need a budget of $10,000 for computer peripherals. Third, resources. I need access to the test laboratory during June. So, be as clear as possible when describing your project's needs. The more specific you are, the more likely other people are to understand and meet those needs. Facing the unknown when planning. As you proceed through your planning process, you can identify issues or questions that may affect your project's performance. Unfortunately, just identifying these issues or questions doesn't help you address them. So, don't forget to consider all project assumptions when you develop your project's risk management plan. That's all for tonight. Thank you.